Well, it all started in 2001, which was 17 years ago. So it's a third of my life as it's taken to get this film on the screen. And it was my co-writer, co-director, and late husband, Richard Glatzer, who discovered her. He was an avid reader, and he started reading Colette's novels and then a biography, and he said to me, there's a film in here, this is a very incredible character and a powerful story. And I started reading up and agreed with him, and we started working on the screenplay together. Well, filmmakers always want their film to happen as quickly as possible. And back in 2001, we were like, this is ready. We see this film. We know how great it's going to be. I don't think the world was quite ready for Colette. Yeah. When we pitched her story, a lot of people would be like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but it's a period piece. It's in the past. It's not completely relevant to today. And she's a little out there. She's a little too wild. I mean, a woman who lived 100 years ago still being perceived as being, too crazy for today's audiences. And so we kept working, pushing this project forward, and now I think it is exactly the right time for the film to come out. I think the way she lived and what she did is bang on today's conversations to do with the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement, LGBT equality. She's basically a woman struggling against some giant male ego to get her voice heard, and that happens 1,000 times a day all over Britain, all over the world. Well, it's really an origin story. It's kind of like, in the superhero movies, like how they got their superpowers. For us, we focused on this marriage because it really shows Colette's development, that her husband was initially a mentor, but then became a very exploitative force on her writing, and that she just had this incredible talent that she had to discover as her access to power. The way we did it, we shot out of sequence. So to get that effect of seeing Kira grow into her own skin in the movie, we sort of divided Colette into 7 phases. And for each phase, the costume, hair and makeup, all that stuff was different. But also Kira's energy was different. Like her body language was different. Her voice had a different timbre to it. And her eyes had a more averted gaze at the beginning, a very direct stare at the end. So you very much see when it's cut together her becoming the writer she was destined to be. Missy is very much a pioneer of, gender fluidity. He was an aristocrat who, Missy had the body of a cisgendered woman, but the identity of, a masculine man. And Colette had an affair with Missy for over 7 years that overlapped with her marriage with Willie. And Missy was very much someone who was, pioneering this idea of this is who I really am. Missy was wearing trousers at a time when in Paris you could be arrested for that, or beaten up, or subject to a lot of abuse. But he was determined to say, I'm going to do this because I have the money and position to say it can be done. So maybe one day all women will be able to wear trousers if they wish, But it goes beyond the clothes. It's really about freedom to be who you really are. And because Missy was so in touch with his authentic self, it inspired Colette to get in touch with her authentic self. And if you look at the letters between them, it's really interesting because French is a very gendered language, and they use both male and female language with each other. So there's elements of a lesbian romance there and elements of, solid transgender identity in this character and in this relationship.
That sounds amazing to read those letters.
Yeah, they're incredible. And they're very, actually, surprisingly ordinary because they're writing every day. So they write about all kinds of just the small details of life, but they make a fascinating study. When we hear stories of men behaving badly, powerful men that keep breaking in the news all the time, often these aren't people running around with Satan's horns coming out of their heads. They can be very charming and kind of charismatic and get away with that bad behavior through this veneer of charm. And that was certainly who Willie was. Willie was the life and soul of the party. He had tremendous energy. If he came into the room, the temperature went up. Colette was definitely very enamored by him, especially in the early years of the marriage. And we needed to show that he had the power over her that was not just financial and cultural, it was also personal, an emotional connection and a sexual connection. So when she starts trying to break free of him, it's not just about walking out the door, it's about transcending something within herself that is so attached to Willie. And Dominic plays the character showing his bad side, but also showing how Colette could remain attracted to him even when he behaved so abominably. Kira grows into herself. Willie slides somewhat unceremoniously into middle-aged dissipation. And Dominic had actually 3 fat suits that progressively grew throughout the shoot. And, he looks a little more sort of ragged, like the sort of batteries running out in his electric toothbrush. By the end of the movie, he's struggling with impotency, which he confesses to Colette. He looks kind of roomy around the eyes. His time is over. Whereas she goes on to become the great Colette. He's just a footnote on her biography. I have been very lucky to work with some of the most incredible actresses in the world in these 3 films, and I see them as collaborators. I connect to the narratives in ways that sort of often transcend gender. Like with Still Alice, my partner Richard was dealing with ALS, or motor neuron disease, which is a tremendously difficult disease, and it helped him connect with what Alice Howland is going through in the story, and very much formed a relationship with Julianne that, informed the way that performance was delivered. And with Colette, I feel like as a queer man, I have an identification about this idea of like being in a situation in your life where you have to break through a barrier in order to claim who you really are. I think many, queer men, people of color, working class people, all kinds of like people in society have barriers in their life. And I think Colette is an inspiration to any of us who need to push through and say, no, I have a voice too. And with Earthquake Bird, it's kind of, there is a very complex connection for me. It's set in Japan in 1989, the novel by Susanna Jones. I lived in Japan in 1989, and the story really deals around sort of death and the residual guilt left over after people pass, and that's what I've been living through for the last 4 years. So each time they're women's stories, I'm an ally, I'm a feminist, I'm supportive, I support talented women artists, I work with great women producers, but I recognise my role as a man is one in supporting and not leading the movement.